The story you're about to hear is one that crossed oceans, shattered families, and exposed how a single moment of misplaced trust can change countless lives forever. It begins not in the crowded streets of Tokyo, but in the historic English city of Coventry, where a young woman named Lindsay Hawker spent her childhood surrounded by love, encouragement, and endless possibilities. Friends remembered her as someone who could brighten any room with her smile. While teachers admired her determination and intelligence, she excelled in school, later earning a degree in biology with top honors, proving that she possessed both ambition and compassion. Yet despite all her achievements, Lindsay longed for something more than academic success. Before committing to a lifelong career, she wanted to experience the world beyond England's borders, believing that real growth often comes from unfamiliar places and unexpected adventures. That dream eventually led her to Japan in late 2006, where she accepted a position teaching English at one of the country's largest language schools. Tokyo was unlike anything she had ever experienced, an endless maze of glowing lights, bustling train stations, peaceful temples, and vibrant neighborhoods filled with life. Lindsay embraced every moment of it. She rented an apartment with fellow teachers, explored the city during her free time, and stayed closely connected with her family, friends, and boyfriend back home through late-night calls and messages. From every conversation, one thing became clear: she was genuinely happy. Thousands of miles away from home, she believed she had found the perfect balance between adventure and purpose. But hidden somewhere within the same city was a man whose path was slowly, silently moving toward Hersa, meeting that would soon transform an exciting journey into one of Japan's most haunting criminal cases. Roughly 6 months after arriving in Japan, Lindsay finished another ordinary day of teaching and returned to the train station to collect her bicycle. As she unlocked it, a man unexpectedly approached her, greeting her with a confident smile and claiming that she had once been his English teacher. The statement immediately confused her because she didn't recognize him at all. She politely tried to end the conversation, mounted her bicycle, and began riding home. Instead of accepting her silence, the stranger followed. What began as a casual walk quickly became a determined chase through the streets. Lindsay pedaled faster while the man increased his pace, weaving through intersections and sidewalks in an unsettling pursuit that lasted until she finally reached her apartment building. The stranger introduced himself as Tatsuya Ichihashi. Catching his breath, he apologized for following her and explained that he wanted private English lessons. He offered to pay generously, insisting that the meetings would remain completely professional. Lindsay declined at first, explaining that her schedule was already full. Before leaving, however, Tatsuya made one final request. He asked for a simple glass of water. Although uncomfortable, Lindsay allowed him inside, partly because her roommates were home, making the situation seem less threatening. Inside the apartment, Tatsuya repeated his offer, this time increasing the payment enough to make it financially appealing. Lindsay eventually agreed to meet him for lessons at a public coffee shop a few days later. Before walking out the door, Tatsuya sketched a quick portrait of Lindsay, wrote his name and phone number beneath it, and handed it to her. What appeared to be an awkward but harmless interaction would later become one of the investigation's most important pieces of evidence. Behind Tatsuya Ichihashi's polite appearance lay a life filled with disappointment and disturbing warning signs. Born into a respected family, his father was a physician while his mother worked as a dentist, and both had hoped their son would follow a similarly successful path. Tatsuya once dreamed of becoming a doctor himself, but after failing the necessary entrance examinations, his ambitions collapsed. He eventually earned a university degree in horticulture, yet never pursued a meaningful career afterward. Instead, he relied on monthly financial support from his parents while living in isolation. Friends described him as quiet, withdrawn, and obsessed with physical fitness. He spent countless hours exercising, cycling long distances, and avoiding meaningful relationships. Beneath that seemingly ordinary lifestyle, however, were troubling allegations involving violence toward women, incidents that never resulted in criminal convictions but hinted at a far darker personality. Meanwhile, Lindsay remained completely unaware of his past. She approached the upcoming tutoring session as nothing more than an opportunity to earn extra money while living abroad. Meeting in a busy cafe during daylight seemed like the safest possible arrangement. She had no reason to suspect that the man sitting across from her had spent days thinking about her far beyond the boundaries of an ordinary student-teacher relationship. For Lindsay, it was simply another afternoon before heading to work. For Tatsuya, however, the meeting represented something entirely different. Behind his calm demeanor, dangerous intentions were quietly taking shape, hidden beneath polite conversation and carefully rehearsed manners. The tragedy that followed would reveal just how deceptive appearances can be. On March 24, 2007, Lindsay and Tatsuya met at the agreed coffee shop for their first English lesson. Security cameras later captured them speaking naturally while waiting in line for drinks. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual, yet subtle details told a different story. Whenever Tatsuya leaned closer, Lindsay instinctively stepped backward, maintaining a careful distance. The lesson lasted around an hour before Tatsuya suddenly claimed he had forgotten his wallet at home. He apologized repeatedly and suggested they take a quick taxi to his nearby apartment so he could retrieve the money. Since Lindsay needed to be at work later that afternoon and believed the visit would only take a few minutes, she agreed. Upon arriving, she even asked the taxi driver to wait outside, expecting to return almost immediately. Minutes passed, but Lindsay never came back. Eventually, assuming his passengers had made other arrangements, the taxi driver drove away without another thought. Hours later, Lindsay failed to appear for work, something that was completely unlike her. As evening turned into night, concern quickly spread among her roommates, who contacted police after realizing nobody had heard from her. Her family in England also noticed an unusual silence. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. By the following day, the concern had grown into fear. The cheerful young woman who never missed responsibilities had seemingly disappeared, without leaving behind a single explanation. What nobody yet realized was that the answers they desperately sought were hidden behind the walls of the very apartment she had entered only moments after leaving that waiting taxi. Investigators began retracing Lindsay's final known movements, interviewing co-workers, roommates, and anyone who had spoken with her recently. Her roommates quickly remembered the sketch left behind by the man she planned to tutor, giving detectives both a name and a face almost immediately. Officers traveled to Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment hoping for answers. At first, repeated knocks received no response. Curious neighbors allowed officers to look toward the apartment from an adjoining balcony, where they noticed unusual movement inside despite the lights being off. Even more strangely, Tatsuya's bathtub had been moved onto the balcony, an odd sight that immediately raised suspicion. Fearing someone might still be alive inside, officers requested additional backup before attempting to enter the apartment. Just as police prepared to force their way inside, the apartment door unexpectedly swung open. Standing before them was Tatsuya, carrying a backpack. In a split second, he shoved past the officers and sprinted through the narrow hallways. The startled officers managed to grab only his backpack as he vanished into the surrounding streets, disappearing into Tokyo's endless maze before anyone could stop him. Moments later, investigators entered the apartment and what they discovered would horrify an entire nation. Hidden inside a bathtub buried beneath sand and soil lay Lindsay Hawker's body. It was a scene so disturbing that even experienced investigators struggled to process it. The hunt for Tatsuya Ichihashi had officially begun, but the man responsible had already slipped into the shadows, beginning one of the longest and most extraordinary manhunts in modern Japanese criminal history. News of Lindsay Hawker's murder spread rapidly across Japan and soon reached headlines around the world. Investigators released Tatsuya Ichihashi's photograph, warning the public that he was now one of the country's most wanted fugitives. His image appeared on television broadcasts, newspapers, train stations, and police bulletin boards across the nation. Tips poured in from concerned citizens, but every reported sighting ended the same way, with officers arriving too late or discovering they had chased the wrong person. It was as though Tatsuya had dissolved into thin air. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and still there was no trace of him. For Lindsay's family, every passing day without an arrest deepened the unbearable pain of knowing that the man responsible for their daughter's death was still walking free. The Hawker family refused to let Lindsay's story disappear from public attention. Despite their overwhelming grief, they traveled to Japan to appeal directly to both the public and the authorities. They spoke to journalists, attended press conferences, and pleaded with anyone who might have information to come forward. Their determination earned widespread respect, but it also highlighted growing frustration with the investigation. Questions began to surface about how a suspect had managed to escape despite being surrounded by multiple police officers. Critics argued that crucial mistakes had allowed Tatsuya to vanish, while Lindsay's parents struggled to understand how justice could feel so painfully out of reach. Their fight was no longer only about finding a killer, it had become a fight to ensure that their daughter's life would never be forgotten. While investigators searched tirelessly, Tatsuya was living a life few could have imagined, constantly moving from one region of Japan to another. He avoided staying anywhere long enough to attract attention. He survived by taking temporary construction jobs, sleeping in internet cafes, abandoned buildings, and isolated shelters hidden far from crowded cities. Every day became a careful exercise in survival. He avoided conversations, changed his routines, and lived with the constant fear that someone might recognize his face. The country was searching for him, yet somehow he remained invisible, blending into ordinary crowds while carrying the weight of one of Japan's most infamous crimes. As time passed, Tatsuya became increasingly obsessed with changing his appearance. Before seeking professional help, he attempted horrifying alterations himself, cutting away identifying facial features in an effort to erase the face displayed on wanted posters. Eventually, after saving enough money from temporary work, he underwent cosmetic surgery to further disguise himself. Believing his transformation was complete, he continued moving across the country under his new appearance. But no matter how much he altered his face, he could never escape the truth of what he had done. Every newspaper, every television report, and every reward poster reminded him that somewhere, someone might still recognize the man hiding beneath the changes. His freedom was built entirely on fear, and it was only a matter of time before that fear would catch up with him. By 2009, police had become increasingly desperate to end the nationwide manhunt. Authorities dramatically increased the reward for information, leading to Tatsuya's arrest, encouraging doctors, employers, and members of the public to report anyone resembling the wanted fugitive. The breakthrough finally came from an unexpected source. A plastic surgeon contacted investigators after recognizing his patient from the widely circulated photographs. Before and after surgical images confirmed what police had long suspected. Tatsuya had deliberately altered his appearance to evade capture. Those updated photographs were immediately released nationwide, giving the public an entirely new image of the fugitive they had spent years searching for. The publicity shattered whatever sense of security Tatsuya believed he still possessed. Co-workers at a construction site reportedly began recognizing similarities between the man they worked beside and the country's most wanted criminal. Realizing his disguise had failed, he made plans to flee once again, intending to disappear to the remote islands where he believed nobody would ever find him. But fate had finally turned against him. At a ferry terminal, an alert employee noticed the resemblance and quietly notified authorities. Within minutes, police officers approached Tatsuya and calmly asked for his identity. There was no desperate sprint, no dramatic escape, and no clever disguise left to hide behind. After more than 2 years on the run, he quietly admitted who he was. The chase that had consumed an entire nation was finally over. Following his arrest, investigators formally charged Tatsuya Ichihashi with Lindsay Hawker's murder. During the trial, the disturbing truth surrounding her final moments emerged in heartbreaking detail. Tatsuya admitted that he had lured Lindsay into his apartment under the false promise of paying for the English lesson before violently attacking her. When she fought to escape and cried for help, he claimed panic overtook him, leading him to silence her forever. His confession confirmed the worst fears of Lindsay's family, who had spent years desperately hoping for answers while enduring unimaginable uncertainty. Listening to the details inside the courtroom became another painful chapter in a tragedy they had never chosen to face. In July 2011, the court delivered its verdict. Tatsuya Ichihashi was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Although Lindsay's family had hoped for the maximum punishment available, the court concluded that life imprisonment was the appropriate sentence under Japanese law. Despite their disappointment, the verdict finally ended years of legal uncertainty. Justice, though imperfect in their eyes, had finally arrived, yet no sentence could restore the future Lindsay had dreamed of or erase the emptiness left behind for those who loved her. The courtroom marked the end of the trial, but for her family, the grieving would continue for the rest of their lives. Before his trial concluded, Tatsuya attempted one final act that many found impossible to understand. He wrote a book describing his years as a fugitive, detailing how he had survived while avoiding capture across Japan. He announced that any profits from the publication would be given to Lindsay's family. They rejected the offer without hesitation. No amount of money, public confession, or expression of regret could repair the devastation his actions had caused. To them, the book was not an act of redemption, it was another painful reminder that their daughter's life had been reduced to a story the world would continue to discuss. Long after she was gone, Lindsay Hawker should be remembered not for the violence that ended her life, but for the kindness, intelligence, and optimism that defined it. She traveled across the world to educate others, embrace a new culture, and build unforgettable memories. Instead, her generosity was exploited by a man who mistook kindness for vulnerability. Her story remains one of Japan's most unforgettable criminal cases, serving as both a tribute to a remarkable young woman and a sobering reminder that danger sometimes hides behind ordinary faces. Even today, Lindsay's legacy lives on through the people who continue to tell her story, not to glorify the killer, but to ensure that the bright future she deserved is never forgotten.